So, the eternal now and the spiritual path. Swamiji said in The Promise of Immortality, no path actually exists except in our own perception. And that really caught my attention. It is not really about getting anywhere. It's not about an outward movement or an outward act. I just realized I'd like to share a poem actually before I start. A little more inspiration for us. This is a poem from Songs of the Soul. Usually we read something from Whispers from Eternity, which is Yogananda's book of prayer poems and demands. And this is a book of poems that he wrote earlier in his time in America. And this poem is called Oceanic Presence. As I sailed away from you on the river of desire, suddenly I found myself launched on your oceanic presence. Though I ran away from you through the fog of incarnations, I arrived at the threshold of your all-pervading temple. In the sphere of thought I flew, north, south, east, west, but the net of your omnipresence surrounded me. Riding the wings of swiftest electrons, I dived below into the bowels of eternity, only to find you there. Above into eternity's heart I zoomed, but no matter how far I went, you stood always ahead of me. In desperation, unable to flee from you, I plunged to the east, to the west, in eternity's chasms, and there I fell in your lap. At last, with the dynamite of my will, I exploded the airship of myself, my thoughts, my love, into countless dust flecks of fading life, floating everywhere into all things, and found that I slept in your bosom. Because I kept my own eyes closed, I thought I was hiding from you. But before your watchful eyes, ever present am I. Open my eyes that I may behold you, looking at me from all sides everywhere. For though I may try to hide from you, and think I do, wherever I am, there are you. I just love that poem. It's one of my favorites. It just so beautifully captures God's omnipresence and all the motions we go through in our lives. And we just can't escape God's presence because he's within us. So we're not really traveling anywhere. We're not trying to get anywhere on the spiritual path. It's more a matter of transforming our consciousness, moving from that limited, time-bound ego consciousness towards that divine, unlimited, eternal super consciousness. So there was a story of a woman who was living with her husband, of course, and a new neighbor moved in next door. And they were sitting down to breakfast, and the wife looked out the window and she saw her new neighbor hanging up her laundry to dry. And she was astonished, and she said to her husband, "Look at that. I can't believe how dirty her laundry is. Someone's got to tell her how to do her laundry properly. It's filthy. She's hanging it up to dry." And the husband just kept eating his breakfast. He didn't say anything, but she, went on. And a couple days later, they were sitting down to breakfast again and looked out the window, and the wife again was astonished. She saw the neighbor again hanging her laundry, but this time the laundry was clean. And the woman said, someone must have said something to her. Look how clean her laundry is now. And again, the husband just kept eating, and he said, "Well, actually, I cleaned the window." And it's a funny story, but there's a deeper truth to it, which is that so often we're looking at the world, or even looking at ourselves, and we think we're seeing things as they really are, but we're seeing it really through the cloudy, dirty window of ego consciousness, through that limited perception. We're not usually seeing ourselves or the world as they really are. We are limited by our habits and our likes and dislikes, and all of these things create this film over the window of our consciousness, so to speak. But we can transcend that, and that's our work. on the spiritual path. As Swami said in this reading, it's really about transforming our self-perception. So there's another story some of you might be familiar with about a group of 6 blind brothers who had heard of this animal called an elephant. And of course, they'd never seen an elephant, but they'd heard about it. And they wanted to get a sense of, they were curious and they wanted to get a better sense of what this animal really was like. What was its shape and form? So they found an elephant, and each of them, went up with their hands to try and feel what was an elephant? What was an elephant like? And so one brother went up to the trunk and said, "Oh, it's like a big, thick snake." And another brother went up to one of the legs and said, "No, it's not like a snake. It's like a big tree trunk, like a big pillar. That's what an elephant's like." And then, of course, another brother went up to the ear and he said, "No, it's not like a tree trunk. It's thin and flat and smooth. It's like a fan." And another brother, was at the tail and said, "No, it's like a rope." And another brother was at the tusk and said, "No, it's not like a rope at all. It's really sharp, like a spear. That's what an elephant's like." And of course, the last brother was at the side of the elephant and was feeling and said, "No, it's not sharp at all. It's like a big wall. That's what an elephant is like." And so, of course, they got into a big argument because they were all just seeing one part of the elephant, seeing, meaning with their hands. They were only perceiving one part of the elephant. And this is what happens when we're in ego consciousness. We're only seeing one little part of the world or of ourselves, right? We see ourselves, I'm a wife, I'm a husband, I'm a teacher. We see ourselves in terms of what our job is or our relationships or, the things we've accomplished. But that's just one little limited perception of who we are. And the blessing and the grace of the Guru is that, and the masters, all the masters, they come to not just show us how great they are, but to remind us of our greatness, to help us remove that film of ego consciousness and start to see ourselves as we really are, to start to transform our self-perception. So some of you know, as Seema mentioned, that I have been an Education for Life teacher here at Ananda Village. And right now I'm running a program called Conscious Families to share education for life with parents and families. And one of the exercises that I like to do with parents, one of the first exercises, is something I called Entering Their World, which is this beautiful opportunity for parents to look at a situation with their child and first look at it just from their own perception and their own feelings in that situation, what they thought happened and how they saw it, and then to take a moment and go back and look at the situation from the perspective of their child. So what was their child feeling in that moment? What was their child perceiving in that moment? And just taking that opportunity to try and expand their awareness and see things from that other point of view is such a blessing. And it just absolutely transforms their perception, both of their child and of themselves in that situation, and oftentimes can change the whole energy of the situation. Well, anyways, I was thinking about this week and how we have the opportunity to practice this with the masters. We can enter their world, right? We can take a moment and think of a situation that we're in right now, maybe a challenging situation. And we think we're seeing all sides of it, oftentimes, and take a moment to look at it with the eyes of the master. What would master see in that person maybe that's been bothering you, or in that situation that's stressing you out? How would master see that situation, and how would master see you in that situation? When we enter into that perception, we're starting to try to attune ourselves to that super consciousness, to that divine consciousness, to expand beyond that limited ego consciousness. So how do we clean that window, right? We can be attuning to the masters, absolutely, by surrounding ourselves with good company, those that remind us of our higher self. Such a blessing to be in community together, to have these moments of satsang together. But also, as the reading says, to focus on the spiritual eye. so powerful, because as we focus our gaze and our mind on the spiritual eye, we create a magnetism and the energy moves upward, and we begin to expand our awareness beyond our limited perception. I had an interesting experience with the spiritual eye, which was not actually a meditation. It was during Sunday service a couple of years ago. At the end of Sunday service, we usually have the Festival of Light. And at the end of the Festival of Light, everyone goes up to the ministers for a blessing. We haven't done this, unfortunately, in a while because of the pandemic, but this time we were. And so everyone goes up to get a blessing, and the minister touches you at the point between the eyebrows. So at the time, I don't remember the details, but I do remember I was not feeling great about myself. I was kind of in a low place. And when I went up for the blessing, the minister touched me at the point between the eyebrows, and just in that instant, I had this instantaneous, it was like I heard in my mind instantaneously, this is who you really are. And I could just feel, just in that few moments that I was being blessed, just the truth of that statement, this is who you really are. And that's the invitation, to draw our consciousness upward to the point between the eyebrows, to expand our consciousness beyond the limits of the ego, and to connect with who we really are, our divine reality as a child of God. The direction of our gaze both indicates our state of consciousness. You'll see, obviously, when someone's sleepy, their eyes start to go down and they're going into subconsciousness. And when we're awake and ready, we're looking straight ahead and we're in the conscious mind. And when we're drawing our eyes upward, it indicates, as the reading said, that many saints, lift their gaze to go into ecstasy. But we can also cultivate those states of awareness with our own gaze and with our focus. So Master talked about in Autobiography of a Yogi how in the first years that he spent in Sri Yukteswar's ashram, he made every effort to focus his mind and his gaze at the point between the eyebrows. And he said, if you want to make rapid spiritual progress, focus your mind and your gaze there as much as possible. Such a good reminder. Kriyananda once asked Yoganandaji, what are the most important qualities on the spiritual path? And Yogananda said, deep sincerity and devotion. And he emphasized it's not about the amount of time that you've spent on the spiritual path, but your ability to go deep in God and your love for God and your commitment to God. So it's not about arriving anywhere or getting anywhere or achieving anything. And it's such an important reminder because everything else in this world is telling us the opposite of that. That we have to achieve this in order to be happy. We have to get here. We have to do this. Even just the day-to-day things of our lives, right? We can have this long to-do list. And so it's so important to take that time in meditation to just reconnect and remember there's no place to go. There's nothing we need to accomplish except to be in that divine reality, to connect with that divine reality within. And one of the most powerful ways to connect with that is through the power of our thought and our concentration. So there's a story of a disciple of Yogananda's who was meditating once outside on a balcony on a rooftop. And as he was sitting to meditate, he heard someone come out and he thought, oh, it's the master. And so he tried to tune into that consciousness. And as he did so, he felt a person come and sit next to him, and he was tuning into master's consciousness and just diving so deeply into this deep bliss and love that he could feel radiating in master's consciousness. And then as the meditation drew to a close, he felt something kind of tickling his foot. And so he looked down and he realized that it had been a dog that had come out and was sitting next to him the whole time. And yet he was so near to Master, just in his thoughts, just in his concentration, just in his receptivity to that consciousness. And he was transformed by that. Master said, to those who think me near, I will be near. And that is the truth of that story, and for all of us, that when we hold our thoughts upward, when we remember the presence of the Masters, they're near to us always. I have a story I'd like to share from Asha's book, Nayaswami Asha's book, Lightbearer, which is her biography of Swami Kriyananda. And, so often we can get caught on the things that we have yet to do, the parts of ourselves that we're yet to perfect. And we can get a little discouraged by that and think, oh, well, someday I'll be better, hopefully, or eventually, or later. And we get caught in this time-bound concept. And so this is a little story to teach with a teaching around that. She's talking about a time when she was helping Swamiji with his correspondence. And she says, when I started helping Swamiji with his correspondence, unanswered letters and other works in progress were scattered everywhere. My concern was that people's needs would be lost in the shuffle. Not a chance. As I went through the house hunting and gathering letters, it was soon clear Swamiji knew where every letter was and the timeline for the reply. He made remarks like, don't miss the one under the toaster from the woman in Seattle whose sister has cancer. Or on the dresser from the Indian boy who wants to be a monk but his parents want him to marry. And today we must respond to the woman from Sweden whose mother is ill. In those years, he was the only one who gave Kriya initiation, which took place once or twice a year. During the ceremony, he dipped his finger into a small bowl of colored powder, then touched each devotee at the point between the eyebrows, the spiritual eye, leaving a mark of initiation. He kept the bowl of powder uncovered on a bookshelf. I picked it up to take it into the kitchen, but put the powder in a sealed jar, washed the bowl, and put it all away. Though Swami was in another part of the house, he heard the movement and intuited my intention. Leave it there, he said, I'm using it. To me, every 6 to 12 months was the future. The same with his projects and letters. I wanted to put them away for later. To him, there was no later. It was all now. The implications went beyond housekeeping. It gave him endless patience with the shortcomings of others. No matter what we did, and it was a rocky road for many of us, he never defined us by our mistakes. He knew that eventually we would get it right, and for him, eventually was the same as now. Such an interesting reminder. Eventually is the same as now. We can hold that consciousness that Swamiji had and tune into that. Reminds me of that line from Master's poem Samadhi, past, present, future, no more for me, but ever present, all flowing, I, everywhere. There's no past, there's no future, there's only this moment and our true self. When we let go of the past and let go of the future, we can let God's presence into our lives right now. There's no later. Yogananda Ji even asked this question, when will I find God? Which we might find surprising. And most surprising of all, he asks it or shares about it in the chapter of his autobiography called An Experience in Cosmic Consciousness. And so he's just had this experience of cosmic consciousness, of samadhi, and he goes to Sri Yukteswar a little while later, a couple days later maybe, and says, when will I find God? And Sri Yukteswar says, you found him already. And Yogananda Ji says, no, sir, I don't think that I have. And Sri Yukteswar says, certainly you're not expecting a venerable personage adorning some antiseptic corner of the cosmos, which isn't that how we think of God often, that he's far away? And Sri Yukteswar goes on to say, ever new joy is God. Ever new joy is God. So that's how we can begin to bring that into our daily lives, to transform our perception from the limited, ego-bound consciousness to that divine consciousness by looking for joy, by choosing joy in every moment. Swami Kriyananda once said, joy is not the solution. I'm sorry, did I say that right? Yeah. Joy is the solution, not the reward. I'll say that again. Joy is the solution, not the reward. But how often we live our lives in reverse, doing all these things to someday achieve joy as the reward for all our good deeds. But we have to live in that joy. And Swami Kriyananda was such a beautiful example of that. There's also this story of a guru who had his disciples around him, and they were all asking him, when will I find enlightenment? When will I be liberated? And so he was telling each disciple, how many more incarnations. And so to one he said, oh, it'll be 20 or 30 more incarnations. And the disciple was okay. And then the next, oh, it'll be at least 100 incarnations for you until you find God. And that disciple was, okay, I guess I'll keep going. And then at last, there was this very deep disciple who came up and asked, and the guru said, for you, it'll be 100,000 lifetimes. And everybody was shocked. How could it be? Oh, this poor man, he has to wait all that time. And so he just left quietly and went outside. And later, when the satsang was over, they went outside and they saw he was dancing and singing in joy. And they ran up to him and they said, didn't you hear? What are you doing? Didn't you hear? It's going to be 100,000 lifetimes until you find God. And the disciple, he just said, didn't you hear? I'm going to find God. And in that instant, he became liberated. It was that joy, choosing joy, living with joy in every moment, loving God in every moment. He's right there. There's no place to go. There's nothing you have to do to choose joy, to live in that joy. Yoganandaji said, life is a struggle for joy all along the way, but may I fight to win the battle on the very spot where I now am. So not later, right now, whatever's in front of you, to choose joy, to raise your consciousness to the point between the eyebrows, to see with the master's eyes, with the master's consciousness, and to fight to win that battle over ego consciousness, and to return to your true home in that divine consciousness. It's where you belong. It's who you really are. I wanted to share a story from Swamiji's life. He had so many stories from his life, so many examples of obstacles, of difficulties that he overcame almost seemingly without effort, because he was in that super consciousness so much of the time. He was in that joy and that bliss of God so much of the time. Some might say all of the time, really. His consciousness was ever the same. And he had many medical challenges, as many of you know, and one time he was going to a new doctor, and the new doctor had to, take a medical history. And so he said, do you have heart problems? Yes. Have you had prosthetic surgery? Yes. He'd had both of his hips replaced at that point. Any other surgeries? Yes. Arthritis? Yes. Diabetes? Yes. High blood pressure? Yes. And so on and on it went like this. And at the end, the last question was, how would you rate your overall health? And Swamiji just smiled and said, excellent, just excellent. And he wasn't faking it. That's where he lived. He just lived in that joy and in that bliss. And what a beautiful example for all of us to just fight to win that battle for joy right here, right now. Whatever obstacles in front of you, there are no obstacles. They're only opportunities. Opportunities to grow, opportunities to expand, opportunities to transform our consciousness, to rise in that divine light. I'd like to end with a reading from The New Path, Swami's autobiography. And this is right at the beginning, in just the first chapter. He talks about, I'm sorry, I lost the page. Give me just a moment. Here it is. He says, most of us, alas, wander about in this world like pilgrims without a map. We imagine joy's shrine to be wherever money is worshipped, or power, or fame, or good times. It is only after very distant roaming that, disappointed at last, we pause in silent self-appraisal. And then we discover, perhaps with a shock, that our goal was never distant from us at all. Indeed, never any farther away than our own selves. This path we walk has no fixed dimensions. It is either long or short, depending only on the purity of our intentions. It is the path Jesus described when he said, "The kingdom of God cometh not with observation, neither shall they say, Lo here or lo there, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you." Walking this path, we yet walk it not, for the goal, being inward, is ours already. We have only to claim it as our own. So I leave you with that inspiration to claim your divine birthright, to live in that joy, in that state of superconsciousness, and to strive for that every day and every moment. To draw your consciousness up in meditation, your gaze upward to the point between the eyebrows, to think of Master, to keep him near in your thoughts, to be with him always. To those who think me near, I will be near. He can be with you right now. God bless.